So the ancient Chinese poets are often neglected in favor of the Greeks and Romans. Why is this wrong?
The ancient what?
The ancient Chinese poets get neglected in favor of the Greeks and Romans. Why is this wrong?
Because we have more in common with the Greeks than the Chinese. I mean, uh, how China basically self-segregated itself from most of the rest of the world. The Greeks, basically, once they imploded, they by the Roman Empire and then the Byzantine, carried through the Holy Roman Empire and out through Europe. And since Europeans, if you believe Jared Diamond's book about why Western society has prevailed over a lot of other American and African and Asian societies because of geographical features. It's basically simply that. The Chinese poets
Why is that wrong, though? So I think it's wrong that they get neglected in favor of the Greeks and Romans. Why is that wrong?
Oh,
you want me to just redo that?
Well, no, I mean, it's wrong simply because the Chinese poets, generally speaking, the top 4 or 5 that you could name are probably better. They have more cogent observations. Just on a qualitative reason, it's wrong for that reason. Um, uh, I don't know what I can really say any more deeply than that.
Right. I mean that would work. I was just such because as far as like splitting these apart and putting little snippets out, I think it's not something that most people really think about. We have a set of ancient poets. Most people just kind of lump that together because of the time period. But in fact, I do think there's a strong qualitative difference between the Chinese versus the Greeks and Romans. That's kind of perspective that I think people should hear. In a kind of like 30, 60 second condensation.
Well, the Chinese also did come. The Li Pos and the Tu Fus and the Po-chu-is also did come 800 to 1,000 years after the Greeks, somewhere along that line. Uh, so they also did have, uh, you know, and they also came from a much larger society as well. We can talk all we want about the Greeks and the Romans being important, but the Chinese, even I think 1,200 years ago, the Chinese probably had something like 80 to 100 million people in their country. The Greeks, for example, when they and if you want to lump all the city states, I think might have had only 2.5 million people that lived in all of the Balkans. Probably not even that many. So there's a lot more that the Chinese had to draw on. They came later. I mean, if you're looking for an anthropological or cultural reason why the Chinese were more advanced, they did come late at a later date in time. They did have greater access to a larger society. Believe it or not, probably a more pluralistic society because when we think of Chinese, there are actually about 7 or 8 Chinese peoples that would be considered Chinese. Hans and Mandarins are the two that come right to mind. I know there's another handful that are Chinese, not to mention the Tibetans and other non Chinese minority groups. So they had a lot bigger pot to draw from as well.